Hello, my name's Dr Rebecca Carter Dillion. I'm a Senior Research Fellow at the University of Plymouth. I work for a national programme called the Health Determinants Research Collaboration, and as part of that I'm working as a researcher in residence linked to Plymouth City Council's Public Health Department. My role is about supporting people to do research and evaluation. I'm going to talk today about an approach called ripple effects mapping. A little bit about how to do it, how to use the data generated, thinking about how to use it in different areas of work, and how you can plan and run a ripple effects mapping workshop yourself. Ripple effects mapping comes from a community development background. It's relatively new, it's been around for the last 15 years or so. And it's both a project development and an evaluation tool. And what's really valuable about it is that it's a participatory approach, and it brings different stakeholders together to understand and capture the impact and learning over time related to a particular project or activity or intervention. And those stakeholders might involve the people who've designed or funded the project, the people who've delivered it, and then of course the people who are the recipients or the service users in relation to that activity or project. It's about recognising achievements and successes. So often when you do an evaluation, you are under some kind of there's some expectation that you will report on how well you've achieved different targets in relation to what you set out to do, and that's often done right at the end of the project or activity. This is about actually looking more broadly than just what you set out to do, but thinking about other outcomes and other successes, and also where things have been difficult and things have been challenging as you've gone along. If it's done well, it can be very good for bringing people together to think about developing their personal skills on the project as it goes along, so the iterative development of the project, and it can also enhance motivation and engagement with the project. Ripple effects mapping is useful if you want to understand the wider contribution that a project activity or intervention makes, and it fits with system thinking. It fits with the idea that you think holistically about the activity. It's focusing on contributions rather than attribution, so it's not about thinking in a linear way in terms of X causing Y. It's interested instead of maybe that X did contribute to Y, but also contributed to A, B, C, and other things. It's looking at how a system has adapted over time. So you might look back over a period of time of say 3, 6 or 12 months and you think, okay, where did we start? What did we set out to do? What were we expecting this project to achieve? And actually how have things changed and adapted and been flexible in relation to the needs of the people we're working with or the nature of the project and so on. You can use it to look at how new connections and working relationships have developed, and also how mindsets and working cultures have changed. So it's something that it's not a linear approach. It's not about starting at the beginning and working your way along in a linear way. You can very much move backwards and forwards when you're thinking through your project. Other aspects can be captured through ripple effects mapping. So you can look at how the organisations and individuals have been impacted, and that might be the service users, the people for whom were the recipients of the support or the project. But it can also be used to think about the individuals in terms of the staff, the volunteers who might be involved in a project or activity. What skills have they developed? What new things have they learned? And so on. It's useful for looking at how long it takes for an impact to be felt. So often with say community projects or things that are funded for a specific length of time, you might be under might be an expectation that something can be achieved within 6 months or 12 months or 3 years. And actually, by doing this mapping, you can see that actually sometimes it takes longer for impacts to be felt, and sometimes it takes longer than the duration of a project or an activity. It's really good for looking at who's been impacted, and that's useful for thinking, well, did we set out to impact and have positive outcomes for a certain population or in a certain locality? But then you can think, well, who wasn't involved? Who didn't we manage to reach? And then that's useful for thinking, okay, do we need to do some targeted work to maybe reach out to different people to make sure that they are also benefiting from the work that we're doing? And the most important thing about ripple effects mapping is the learning. What's been learned along the way? And of course that we learn when things go to plan, but often we also learn a lot when things don't go to plan. And this is about capturing that and being very open to the idea that when things have been challenging and when things have not quite gone to plan, that actually that's an opportunity for learning. So how to do ripple effects mapping? It should be done alongside the project delivery to support the iterative development of a project. So it's not something you necessarily would do at the end of the time, but actually think, well, let's build it in to the timescale of the project. So it might be that you're looking to do something over 12 months. You think, okay, well, let's do it 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and so on. And the reason why that's useful is it helps you look at the journey of your project or your activity, and you can look at what's gone well and what might need to change. You can look at the networks and connections you've made, maybe with other stakeholders, with partner organisations, and you can think, okay, well, this is working well, we want to continue doing that, but actually we need to maybe make some changes going forward. It can be used as part of the project or service evaluation, and it works well to work alongside other data collection methods. So you might have relevant quantitative data, survey data, and so on, and other qualitative data from other methods such as focus groups, interviews, and so on. So this is a qualitative tool, but it complements other data collection tools. So if you're trying to do an evaluation of the work you're doing, it can work well to collect that kind of qualitative story to go alongside those other methods that you have. You invite your stakeholders together to attend a workshop, and it works well in small groups, and it works well when you have people that know each other well, because it can be difficult sometimes to take a step back from the work that we do and think about everything we've achieved at maybe over a period of time. You know, sometimes a case of going back through calendars, through diaries and so on, and looking and thinking, okay, what did we actually do? Who did I link with? What kind of conversations and so on did we need to have to get this project moving? So it's useful when you do it in a group because people can bounce off each other, they can remind each other of things that they've done and so on. And then you come together to map out your activity or project over time, and you think, okay, what makes sense as a coherent time frame? Does it make sense for us to look back 12 months, 6 months, 3 months, or whatever works well? And it can be done several times to track impact over time. So it's not necessarily, as I said, something you just do once. It actually works well if you do it a number of times, and then you can see how your project is developing. I'm a fan of doing it in person, using paper, colours, post-its and so on, but there are digital tools such as Miro that also work well. Here's a very neat and tidy ripple effects mapping example, just to illustrate what I mean. So the example I've given here is of a school physical activity club, which is launched in the summer of July 2020. And you'll see the colours I've used here, and I've developed this colour coding deliberately to help you with then making sense of the data that you collect when you've done your ripple effects mapping. The blue boxes on this ripple effects map are activities or outputs, so they're things that you can quantify, things that you can count. The red boxes are issues or challenges that you've experienced and things that needed responding to. And then the green boxes are the outcomes and impact. And you'd layer it up with more detail, but this is just to illustrate the kind of the first stage that you would do as you went along. So in this example, there's a physical activity holiday club launched, and the purpose of that was to provide some childcare and some interesting activities for young people in the community to get involved with during the summer holidays. And after that club had run through the summer, a number of children were identified as wanting to continue with the football element and wanted the school to run an after school club. So that was an issue or a challenge which the school wanted to respond to. So they set up the after school club, and then you have that additional output that you have children attending that club. And then the green outcome impact that you see there under the title is that you're getting positive feedback from the children in terms of their enhanced skills and confidence around football. Over time, over a number of months, a couple of children drop off and they're no longer attending. So the people running the club are thinking, okay, what's going on here? We've got this challenge here, 2 children are no longer attending. So there needs to be some activity around that to respond to that, to see what they can do to help those children. So in the middle there, you've got the discussion with the parents of 2 of the children. And on the base of those discussions, it's found that there's a need there for funding for the kit that the children need and transport in terms of being able to get home. Staying late after school is causing an issue that the children aren't able to get home afterwards. So this then galvanises the people running the club and the school to think, okay, well, what can we do to try and resolve this issue to make sure those children can attend? So there's a lucky link with a local retailer who's able to provide cut price kit for the club, and then a conversation with school transport. And then some good outcomes that come from that they decide to put on a late bus for children attending the after school club. So that is a positive outcome there, which leads to increased uptake for more children and families being able to be involved. There's also an arrangement made, a good impact in terms of children who are eligible for free school meals are provided with kit, so that takes away that barrier for them. And then the PTA get on board in terms of being motivated to raise funds to support after school clubs at the school. And then another thing that happens is that a parent takes up a coaching opportunity, and that has another positive outcome in terms of it builds that person's employability skills. So from the starting point of setting up a holiday club, all sorts of things happen and all sorts of outcomes play out over time. And some of those would have been, I guess, anticipated, the idea that it would have been something that the children enjoyed and enhanced their skills and confidence. But some of the other things would have maybe not been anticipated from the outset, but they are still really positive and useful. So then you'd think, okay, how can I layer up this map to really try and understand this in better detail? So you might think, okay, of the children attending that club, what is it useful to know about those children? And it might be useful to think, okay, is there anything about those children that is going to make a difference in relation to their ability to access that opportunity to come and play football after school? Okay, is it useful to know the gender of the children? Is it useful to know whether any of these children have any additional needs, and are there any children with SEND? If so, do you have people running the club that have those skills and expertise to be able to provide the support that those children need? Does the time and place where the club is running make a difference to the children? Is it an accessible space, and so on? And if the children are saying they enjoy the club, well, what is it about the club that they enjoy? Because that's a really important learning opportunity. You think, well, okay, is it the people? Is it the activity? Is it the space? Is it a combination of things? Are there some children actually football isn't what they would choose to do? And is there actually space there to think, well, okay, football works for lots of children, but maybe there are other types of activities which would be more suited to other children? Is the school transport, great that the school transport is going to run a late service, but does that cater for children who maybe live in different locations? Are all the routes that we need covered? So it's thinking about the kind of detail that really helps you understand what would enable the best kind of uptake of this type of opportunity. So as I said, I've created this colour coding, and I'll explain in a minute why I think that works well in terms of then being able to write up your data. So I use this blue, red and green, but then if you're doing it in a group, I tend to bring coloured post-its and ask people to add in this detail once they've got that kind of map drawn out. And it's things like those key people. So if you think about that example I've given, somebody's going to have a conversation with the parents about why is it their children are no longer attending the club? And that could potentially be a fairly sensitive conversation, because it might be that when parents are saying actually the cost of the kit and having to pay for the travel home is creating a barrier, that's a potentially sort of sensitive topic. So it needs to be the right person who's got that relationship with the parents, who can have that conversation in a way that makes those parents feel comfortable and able to say to disclose what's going on. I think it's useful to capture wider contextual factors. So are there other things going on that impact on the project or the activity? Are there other things, for example, in this, think about this after school club, are there other activities on which clash and which might make a difference in terms of which children can and can't attend? And then the thing that I think is really important is about capturing those learning points. And you can do this as you go along, and this often does work well. But it might be as you look back and you think, actually, that was a learning point. That was something we maybe didn't realise, but now we understand. And when you look at that and you think about all the learning from when things have not gone to plan, or when things have gone to plan, when things have come out of the work that you've done, it helps you really tell that lovely detailed story of the project, and it helps you think, okay, going forward, what do we want to continue to do, and what changes might we need to make? Now, the example I gave was very neat and tidy. In reality, what you end up with is something much, much messier. And this is an example of some of the effects mapping I did earlier on this year with a community project. And as you can see here, the people have done it along a timeline, and that can work really well. And this was actually done in 3 separate groups and looking at different aspects of the same project. And then what worked well was that those groups, they did it themselves at their tables, and there's lots of discussion and lots of thought through of what was important to them and what they thought had been really valuable and interesting about the projects. And then they rotated around the room and looked at each other's maps, and therefore people then able to layer up and make the links between the different aspects. And it was interesting to see people had different perspectives on the same project and had drawn out different things as being particularly significant. So you start with those small peer group conversations, as I said, and you can take an activity or an aspect of a project. It can also be done to tell the story of a particular individual or a family and map out what's happened to them. And it can also be done by service providers, by practitioners, if they're thinking about, okay, when I came into this role, this is where I started, and this is the work I've done over time, and the skills I've developed, and the knowledge I've built up, and the partnerships I've established, and so on. And that can work really well if you're looking at somebody, if you want somebody to be able to reflect on, say, their experience of being involved in activity or being involved in a particular role. It's very much the case that you might decide to work along a timeline. You don't have to, and I've seen examples where it's done much more free form, or where you have the activity in the middle and then all the different aspects and the different challenges and outcomes and so on radiating out sort of as a sort of spider diagram type visual. But if you're doing it along a timeline, there's absolutely nothing to stop you sort of moving forwards and backwards along the timeline as things occur to you. Adding in that detail, I think, is really important. That really gives that sort of richness. And sometimes it can be interesting to think, okay, what's been the most and least significant impacts? Because this can differ depending on who you speak to. So the person providing the service might think one particular aspect is most significant, but maybe asking, say, a younger person who's been a service recipient, they might actually point to something different, and that can be quite interesting. And then it's always about noting the learning points and making sure that you capture that as best you can. So it is a group reflective activity, and it helps people to see what their impact, their sort of contribution has been. And you might think, actually, if you've got a project or activity which has a number of stakeholders and lots of people working on it and lots of different sort of moving parts, that people might not necessarily feel that their little bit is particularly significant. What's really nice about doing this is that people can see what their contributions, how they fit into the wider picture, and that helps people to see that maybe their little bit of a wider project or a wider activity, how that fits with the wider system, say, around providing services in a particular community or for a particular population, actually is really valuable. Thinking about how it could be improved, so it's useful if you do this activity to then sort of reflect on it as an approach, and for people it's very flexible for people to think, okay, could we use this in relation to our service or our activity? How could we do it in a way that could we improve on it in terms of, maybe do we need to get particular people in the room? Do we need to make sure it's very kind of informal and accessible for people? What could we do differently in our work as a result of having this map and having this visual representation of our experience? And who would we want to include and bring in to have sort of follow-up conversations? Because it's always about trying to reflect on, if things didn't go to plan or you didn't get the kind of positive impacts that you anticipated, it's asking that question, well, if not, why not? What can we learn from this, and how can we take things forward? So how to use your data. It might be that you just want to use it within your organisation, your service, your activity, to think about what you've achieved and how you might want to move forward, maybe things you do or don't want to do differently. But it can also be used as a useful tool in terms of qualitative research, and thinking about how you can see those impact pathways in terms of the activities that you ran and what happened, what kind of impacts and outcomes came as a result. Colour coding things that show the connections, how things link together, showing what's happened. It tells a really good, a really lovely qualitative story. It helps people understand the what in terms of who connected with who, what led to what, and so on. But then the next stage to think, okay, understanding the how and why the activities led to certain impacts. It can also be used to map out and draw out quantitative data, for example, things like the numbers of people who attended an activity. So one of the reasons I think that the colour coding works well is that it then helps you with turning that very detailed and complicated and often messy map into a written format if you need to do that. So it might be that you want to feed back to your funders or your trustees or your service users or your colleagues. And yes, the map shows a lovely sort of visual representation of the project or the story, but sometimes you need to have that in written form for different purposes. So you can do that by you can write up the background and the sort of explanation of what the project is about, and you can think about the inputs, the resources that you've brought into the project or the activity, and then you can use the map to think, okay, all of those blue boxes are those outputs and activities that we've had. The red things, the things in the red boxes were those challenges that we experienced as we went along, the issues that we needed to respond to, and then the green, the outcomes, the impacts with the what, how, and why in relation to those outcomes and the impact. Who was impacted and how and why and so on, and then the learning, and then there can be a huge number of learning points which then are very useful in terms of feeding into your future actions, your planning, or your recommendations going forwards. You can write up your findings as a narrative, but I think this also works well, where you organise your REM data into a table, and you look back at, if you say, this is just an example, if you say you've done it over 12 months, you look back at those in 3-month blocks, what resources you had, what activities, outputs, what were the challenges, what were the outcomes, and then cluster all the learning points at the bottom. And I think it works well if you then bring those together in sort of under different themes just to make it coherent. And then that all then leads into your future actions or your future recommendations. So this can be quite a good way of bringing together that very kind of messy data and presenting it in an accessible way. So finally, my challenge to you is think about an activity or project that you are involved in that you think would lend itself to ripple effects mapping, and just have a go. It's there's no real right or wrong way of doing it. This is just an approach to give you an idea of the way it can be used. I've seen it used in lots of different contexts, with lots of different groups, and I think that the more different perspectives you get around the table, the better in terms of giving you that lovely rich those different perspectives to give you a really rich map, which has lots of lovely detail. This is just a list of some further reading resources which might be of use to you. These are hyperlinks embedded in the presentation, but you should also be able to find these online without too much difficulty. So Shazdan's Guide to REM, which is from the States, which is really one of the earliest publications in relation to this approach. And then James Nobles and colleagues have done some really good work around this, and on that NIHR website at the bottom there are a couple of really useful webinars that you can watch if you're interested around ripple effects mapping. Thank you very much.